Hello. I happened on this article in the Washington Post. Now, as we all know, as I have learnt, even from my fastness of the British Isles here, the Washington Post is a veritable beehive full of buzzwords. And this article is no exception, and it was written by somebody called Caleb Francois. And it says here at the bottom of the article that Mr. Francois is a senior. Somewhere it says that he's a senior in George Washington University. So it means he's got through, 3-4 years of education. And not only can he not write a sentence, there isn't a single original thought in his head, and that's quite disturbing. And I thought I'd just go through a little of his article with you. I mean, I suppose if you actually had to read the whole thing, your intestines would probably start creeping up into your throat in an attempt to strangle you, to put you out of your misery. But here we are. Oh yes, hang on, here it is. Caleb Francois is a senior at George Washington University, and his article reads, it's called Opinion, by the way. Well, I suppose that's one word for it. George Washington University needs a new name. I wonder if the Washington Post is going to get a new name as well. I mean, if they're putting this stuff out, then it must mean they think there's something. They agree with the idea that there's something wrong with the memory of Washington, isn't there? What should we call the Washington Post, do you think? The New Age Post? The Wokery Post? Oh, the Wokington Post, that would do the job. Okay, well, that's my suggestion, Wappo. Last year, George Washington University's Cloyd Heck Marvin Centre, named for a segregationist, and just look how he immediately takes this man and puts him on one side. He's not to be, his memory is to be wiped out. You know, he's a segregationist. That's it. That's all you should know about him. Actually, I looked into his history. He wasn't a remarkable person, but it wasn't that he was a segregationist. He was just not a remarkable person. And you could probably name a university hall after a more remarkable person. That's for sure. I don't know why it was named after him, but if he funded it, my opinion is he should remain the name, because that's what, you know, if it was dedicated through funds raised specifically in his memory for some reason, then you shouldn't have changed the name. However, they did, and I don't know what the circumstances were. Anyway, Cloyd Heck Marvin Centre was renamed the University Student Centre. Oh, how very original that is. In response to student calls for a name change. The name change, now, I just want to draw your attention to this. You see, I was an English teacher. I consider myself still to be an English teacher. And the basis of our culture is the English language. It's the language of Shakespeare. It's the language of Jane Austen. It's the language of William Faulkner. And it's an important language. It's a world language. And you shouldn't mess about with it. That is, at least okay, let's put it this way. It is a language that has a very wide sweep of expressive ability. And if you can't express yourself properly in English, you can't express yourself properly in anything. And this guy can't. Here we go. The name change of the Cloyd Heck Marvin Centre, the name change streamlined with calls for racial justice in a modern era. does that mean? It actually doesn't mean anything. Now, first of all, there's this racial justice, which is a buzzword. Streamlined refers to making something a more efficient shape. What does... Okay, in a modern era, again, in a modern era, again, it's the same sort of slot and push language. Okay, in which students across the country are demanding change. That sentence, listen to this. Change, streamlined with calls for racial justice in a modern era in which students across the country are demanding change. It means absolutely nothing. The language does not connect. And I have mentioned this before. People who are woke don't seem to be able to read English, or write English rather, or express themselves in English. All right, let's carry on. And when you see that sort of thing, you know there's something wrong with that person's brain. As our nation's history of slavery, Jim Crow, redlining and other discriminatory policies towards African Americans has never been fully addressed or atoned for, okay, let's have a look at that. And the nation has a history of slavery. All right, that's like 200 years ago, okay? Jim Crow, we know about that. That was fairly recent. Redlining, I assume that's to do with where black people could live. Or some sort of city zoning, that's a problem. And other discriminatory policies towards African Americans. And what about other sorts of Americans? The Chinese couldn't live in white areas either. Neither could American Indians. There've always been zones in America. But, and it's not good. And it shouldn't be the case that areas are discriminatory, but they were no more discriminatory for other groups than for black people. Or atoned for. Yes, they have been fully addressed and they have been atoned for. They just haven't been atoned for in your estimation, Mr. Francois. And quite frankly, I have a shrewd idea that there is no atoning at all that could ever be made that you will be satisfied with. All right, let's go on. These pleas for racial justice are a reflection of a shifting paradigm in American politics in which compromise and intolerance are no longer an option. Again, that doesn't mean anything. This is not language. However, the renaming of the University Student Centre falls short. You see, the students wanted the name change and the university capitulated on that, and this guy isn't satisfied because he will never be satisfied. And I do not understand why these university authorities, they're supposed to be clever people, aren't they? Why they don't know that there is nothing they could do. They could open a vein and bleed out in the courtyard, and it wouldn't be enough. The renaming of the University Student Centre falls short in addressing the main issues of systemic racism and inequality still present on campus. No, there is no issue of systemic racism and inequality. Well, yes, there might be, and it's against white people. But that's another story. Racism has always been a problem at George Washington. Well, racism was a problem at George Washington as it was in other parts of America. In fact, in almost everywhere in America. Okay, so at the university's founding in 1821, enrolment was restricted to white men. Well, that's terrible. 200 years ago, it was a restricted enrolment. Stanford University would only let 25% of the students be female. You know, there were restrictions all over the place. In Britain, I think until the 20s, a woman couldn't get a degree. A woman could attend the university and could get a diploma, but they weren't allowed to be awarded a full degree. These things have been happening throughout history. But this guy, of course, this person has no sense of perspective, and that's the problem. They learn history in the woke way, but they don't learn it in a way where you can see the whole landscape. Okay, so in 1821, a black person couldn't get into George Washington University. Well, blow me down. And neither could women or in any universities in Britain. One or two of them would accept women for degrees. And it wasn't just, well, actually, now I can think of it, in universities in Britain, men of various different races could enroll at university and get degrees, but women couldn't, of whatever race. So here you have another sort of discrimination. Does that mean that when I went to university in Stanford, I got all heated up because there had been at one time a restriction on the number of females that were allowed into Stanford? No, I was just glad that it was all right by the time I got there. Right. Okay, now we've got another word salad here. In 1987, black students organised to demand more visibility in a predominantly black city where black students were outnumbered by huge majorities. Please, somebody tell me what that means. Black students were, okay, I am assuming, but I may not be right, that what he is actually trying to say is that the town where the university is situated had a majority black population, but the students in the university were mostly white, and the black students who were there, because in 1957 they were there, according to him, but they were outnumbered by white students. What's the percentage of black students in America even now? No, sorry, of black people in America even now, it's 13%, isn't it? So, of course, there is going to be a white majority. Why are you so angry about that, Mr. Francois? Okay. So about 10% today, black students, where black students were outnumbered by huge majorities. But you see, you don't go to university in the same town that you grew up in. Not very often anyway. So that means that if you're in a town which has a majority black population, the university will not reflect that population. Black students on campus continue to struggle for community. No. If you could make community, there would be no struggle. If you're struggling for community, it means you can't get your act together. That's nobody's fault but your own. Despite alleged efforts by administration to enhance diversity, okay, so alleged efforts, I'm assuming he means that the administration aren't really trying. When it's been obvious, it's come out for years that administrations in most universities are desperate to bring in black students and ignoring white students. At Harvard, it turned out, was rejecting Chinese students, or what you refer to as Asian students, I think. In Britain, Asians usually mean people from the Indian subcontinent, so there's a bit of a problem here. But they were actually turning them down, even though they were more qualified, because they wanted to ramp up the black students. That went well, didn't it? despite alleged efforts. So he's reckoning that the administration were not doing what they said they were doing to enhance diversity. The admissions office continues to fail to ensure a student body with adequate minority representation. Well, 13%. You say today it's 10%. So it's just almost right, isn't it? Now, so what's wrong? Black professorship also remains low. Oh yes, I can just see them there in the common room, the professors going, well, we've got this historian. Is he white or black? He's black. Oh, well, let's look for someone else. Can you imagine them doing that? Could you imagine somebody saying, the economics department needs a professor. Well, Tom Sowell's looking for a job. No, we can't have him. He's black. Don't be ridiculous. As black professorship also remains low, especially in the university's international affairs programme. Perhaps it just so happens that there don't happen to be enough black professors studying, or students who have been studying international affairs. Is that possible? Limited black professors teaching African and African American courses. And whose fault is that? Look, when I started at university, I actually started with Arabic and early Islamic culture, history. There were 4 people in my class, and one of them had to be there because she was doing an archaeology degree. It's just there are some areas where people aren't that interested. At the time, there wasn't really a big call for people who understood Arabic and early Islamic history. Well, there still isn't much of a call, actually. But if I were going in for studying something, then maybe I'd reckon that African courses would not actually get me anywhere. I mean, if I had to go to Nigeria to discuss oil production, it just so happens that most Nigerians speak better English than me. What would I need? What would I need studying? I don't know what, Zulu history, when I'm talking to a bunch of Igbos in Nigeria. You know, people study what they think will earn them a living. At the moment, African and African American studies are not going to earn you a living unless you intend to go in for teaching African and African American studies. And they, you know, that's just one of those job-making things, isn't it? And the continued neglect of black academia and black professorship creates a campus culture in which European studies and white perspectives are favoured over black perspectives. That is because black people are 13% of American society. 13%. That's not really very important. A lot of black people might make a lot of noise, but it's not that important. As a matter of fact, you get these odd things. I saw, the web page for a borough council here in Britain, an area of Britain which is basically the countryside and mostly white. And I'll show you a picture of it. I'll find you a picture of it. The web page for the borough council features a black woman. I thought, that's odd. I don't think of that area as being particularly ethnically diverse. So I looked at the ethnicity of the area. It's something, I don't remember now, but I'll find the picture of it. It's something like 98% white. I mean, it's not quite like, maybe 95% white, English, British, European. There are some Irish there as well, which would go in with that lot. So Why did they have a black person on the web page? Because they wanted to show they were being fair and diverse and or something. And it's the same with this stuff. You get this people like Francoise who wants to see more black people and more black people represented, and yet there is only 13% of black people. We are getting a completely unrealistic picture of the people in our own communities here in Britain and over there in America as well. This is a European country with a European tradition and a European culture. And the British culture, I am very proud to say, is one of the widest, richest and most spread out among the world of any culture through history. And just ditching it for African American studies, I'm very sorry. Well, no, I'm not at all sorry. No African languages are taught at the university and calls for reforms are often ignored. Well, maybe there should be African languages taught. So some professors who have an interest in that can get together and form an African language group. I wonder how many African languages you speak, Caleb Francoise, with your French name. These problems are rooted in systemic racism. No, they're not. They are rooted in financial sensibilities. You are not going to get the funding for African languages that you would get for, say, German languages. How many African consulates and embassies will fund African language courses in American universities? But you get German foundations funding German courses, and that's where it all comes from. It's nothing to do with racism. But somebody like you wouldn't know that, would you, Francoise? So yeah, these problems are rooted. It's not a problem not to have an African language. These problems are rooted in systemic racism, institutional inequality, and white supremacy. Oh, buzz, 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 buzz. I'm really getting fed up of that term. There are at least 4 ways the university could achieve progress. Now, he calls it progress. I suppose you can imagine what I call it. And these are the 3 ways the university can achieve progress. Decolonised university curriculum, whatever that means. Increased black enrolment. When black people wish to enrol, the enrolment will increase. Okay, yeah. The renaming of the university and the selection of an African American president. Is that not racism? Pure and simple. Absolutely pure and simple. Okay, so for anyone who wants to enroll for African American courses in the Nelson Mandela University in Washington, be my guest. At least the Washington Post is giving that voice some traction here, isn't it? Well, let's call it the Nelson Mandela Post. All right, look, it goes on and on and on. It says here, in the university's 200-year history, GW has never had an African-American president. I wonder, has it had a Chinese president? Has it had an Indian president? Has it had a woman president? I don't know. It might have done. And this thing goes on and on and on and on. I'm not going to read you anymore because, as I said, my intestines can't take it. And I doubt yours can as well. But that's it. And the fact that the Washington Post is giving this total farrago of nonsense any sort of a voice, well, it says a lot about the Washington Post. And the fact they call this an opinion piece, when it's nothing more than a heap of horse manure. Actually, horse manure is a lot more useful. Then it just shows the standard of the Washington Post, I suppose. All right, well, I'm Graniopteryx. I am to be found on YouTube, Rumble, BitChute and Minds. I let you know when I've uploaded a video on my Twitter, Gab and Parler accounts where I am at Graniopteryx. Let me bring in a British cultural reference here. Looking at this article, I immediately thought, if you have tears, prepare to shed them now. Quote for the day, search for it on Google. Okay, see you next time. Why not treat yourself or a favoured relative or friend to these magnificent examples of merch? The mugs and t-shirts come in the Graniopteryx design or Grambo with a firearm or the more deadly knitting needles. Go to www.graniopteryx.com and whatever platform you're watching this on, please click like, subscribe and share.